There is nothing left to say. We are done.
Not every wound bleeds. Some cut straight through the heart, and no one even sees it happen. The most painful words a woman ever hears don't echo in arguments or come from strangers. They come quietly from the man she loves, the people she trusts, and the moments she thought were safe. It's the soft tone that says, "You're too much." The sigh that means you're not enough. Today, we're talking about the words that don't leave bruises, but leave scars that never fade. They call it invisible emotional violence, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't hit, doesn't leave marks on the skin. It hides in everyday conversations, in the small, calculated pauses, in the tone that chills you faster than winter air. It's not always what he says. Sometimes it's what he doesn't say. You see, real emotional damage rarely comes from shouting. It comes from words delivered with surgical precision, calm, logical, even loving on the surface, but designed to make you question your worth, your memory, your sanity. It's when he says, "You're imagining things," or when his silence answers your pain louder than any scream could. A man doesn't have to raise his voice to break a woman. He can do it gently, with indifference, with sarcasm, with quiet disappointment that makes her feel like a burden just for existing. This is what invisible emotional violence looks like. Death by 1,000 words that sound normal to everyone else, but cut deep into the person who hears them. What makes it dangerous isn't just the cruelty. It's the denial. When you're hit, people rush to protect you. When you're hurt by words, people tell you to toughen up, to stop being dramatic, to get over it. But here's what most people don't understand. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a slap and an insult. The same regions light up, the same pain circuits fire. The sting from "you're worthless" lasts longer in the body than any bruise ever could. And so, she learns to hide it. She smiles through the pain because there's nothing to show. No evidence, no sympathy, just a quiet ache that builds day by day. She starts to think maybe she really is too sensitive. Maybe she does overreact. Maybe she deserves the coldness. That's how emotional violence works. Not by attacking her, but by making her doubt herself until she does the job for him. These words, this tone, this quiet dismissal, they don't just hurt. They rewire her. They change the way her nervous system responds to safety, to love, to trust. They teach her that the people she loves are also the people who can destroy her from the inside out. And yet, because there's no bruise to show, she's told to get over it. There are words that sound harmless, words people say every day without thinking. "You're too sensitive." "You're overreacting." "Why can't you just be happy?" They roll off the tongue like casual conversation. But to a woman who loves deeply, they hit like bullets wrapped in silk. These are what psychologists call invalidation phrases. Words that erase feelings, rewrite reality, and make her believe the problem isn't what happened. It's her reaction to it. When she's hurt and says, "That upset me," and he replies, "You're too sensitive," what she hears isn't just dismissal. What she hears is, "Your emotions are a flaw. You can't trust your own heart." Every time he says it, a tiny piece of her confidence dissolves. She starts to question herself before she speaks. Am I being dramatic? Am I expecting too much? Maybe it really is my fault. Soon, she's apologizing for feeling at all. She learns to shrink her emotions down into socially acceptable sizes, to laugh instead of cry, to nod instead of argue, to smile through the ache. Because experience has taught her one thing: her feelings don't matter unless they're convenient for someone else. This is how emotional erasure begins, not with shouting or cruelty, but with quiet correction. The man doesn't have to insult her. He just has to make her doubt the validity of her own inner world. And the moment she begins to distrust her feelings, she becomes controllable. "You're too sensitive" really means, "I don't want to take responsibility for hurting you." "You're overreacting" really means, "Your pain makes me uncomfortable. Why can't you just be happy?" really means, "Stop reminding me of what I did." But she doesn't translate it that way. She internalizes it. She starts editing her emotions like a writer crossing out the truth from her own story. She deletes her sadness. She rewrites her anger as tired. She replaces disappointment with a half-hearted laugh. And one day, without realizing it, she forgets how to feel altogether. Because here's the tragedy: a woman who starts editing her emotions will soon stop feeling them. Her smile becomes muscle memory. Her eyes learn to hold back tears even when her heart is bleeding. She stops trusting her voice because every time she spoke, it was labeled as drama. She stops reaching out because every time she needed comfort, she got criticism. And people around her say, "She's changed. She's colder now." No, she's not cold. She's numb. Because numbness is what happens when the soul gets tired of being told it's wrong. These phrases may sound like nothing, a casual shrug, a careless comment, but in a woman's mind, they echo. They replay at night when she's alone, long after the conversation ends. They become a chorus that whispers, "You're too much. You're not enough. You're broken for feeling anything at all." This is how women lose their voices, not because someone silences them, but because they learn it's safer to be quiet. And that's the cruel genius of emotional invalidation. It doesn't need volume to destroy you, just repetition. Just the same 3 words said at the right time by the wrong person. So the next time someone says, "You're too sensitive," remember this: sensitivity isn't weakness. It's awareness. It's empathy. It's humanity. And if someone tries to shame you for feeling deeply, it says nothing about your fragility. It only exposes their inability to feel at all. Some words don't yell, but still cut deep. Words that sound casual, even playful, but are really tiny daggers dressed as jokes. "My ex never complained like you." "You used to be prettier." "You should be more like other women." They don't come all at once. They come slowly, drop by drop, like water wearing down stone. This is what psychologists call micro-shaming, a constant stream of tiny comparisons that eat away at a woman's sense of self until she no longer recognizes the person in the mirror. At first, she laughs it off. He didn't mean it that way. The second time, she feels a small sting. The 10th time, it becomes a bruise she carries in silence. Each comment tells her the same thing: who you are now is not enough. And even worse, who you were before was better. That's how control begins, not with commands, but with comparison. He doesn't say change. He just makes her feel guilty for not already being someone else. "My ex never complained like you." That's not about the ex, it's a warning. Stay quiet. Don't ask for more. Don't make me remember why I left her for you. You used to be prettier. That's not about beauty. It's about reminding her that love is conditional, that her value has an expiration date. You should be more like other women. That's not advice. It's humiliation disguised as guidance. Each sentence chips away at her identity. Bit by bit, she adjusts. She changes her hair, her voice, her laughter. She measures every word, wondering if she's finally become the version he wants. But the truth is, no version of her will ever be enough for someone who feeds on comparison. Because comparison is the quietest form of control. It tells her she must earn love that should have been freely given. After enough of these comments, she doesn't need him to criticize anymore. She does it herself. She looks in the mirror and repeats his words, not out loud, but in thought. I used to look better. I complained too much. Why can't I be more like her? That's the final stage of micro-shaming, when the abuser's voice becomes her own. She's no longer fighting him. She's fighting herself. And here's the cruel part. No one sees it happening. From the outside, it looks like she's just trying harder, improving herself, being the best version of herself. But on the inside, she's disappearing. That's how confidence dies, not with a scream, but with a whisper, with small comments said over breakfast, with the tone that says she's a disappointment without saying the word, with the sigh that tells her she's become ordinary. Years later, she won't remember the exact words, but she'll remember how they made her feel, smaller, and she'll look back at old photos, wondering when the light in her eyes dimmed, not realizing it happened every time someone she loved made her compete for the right to feel loved. This is how control hides behind affection. He tells her it's just honesty. He calls it motivation. But what he's really doing is rewriting her self-worth, line by line. And by the time she finally sees it, it's not anger she feels, it's exhaustion. Because you can fight insults, but how do you fight a lifetime of small comparisons that made you forget your own reflection? Confidence doesn't die in chaos. It dies in routine. It dies in repetition. It dies quietly. In the heart of a woman who once believed she was enough until someone she trusted convinced her otherwise. There's a special kind of cruelty that hides inside words that sound like love. I love you, but you're exhausting. You're lucky I put up with you. I didn't mean it that way. You're too dramatic. At first, these phrases sound almost tender, soft, familiar, wrapped in a tone that pretends to care. But that's what makes them so dangerous. They're gaslighting disguised as affection. They confuse the heart, twist the meaning of love, and turn the person who's being hurt into the one who's supposed to apologize for it. When he says, I love you, but you're exhausting, she hears, my love comes with conditions. It's not, I love you for who you are. It's, I love you as long as you don't inconvenience me. And so, she starts trying to be easier to love, quieter, calmer, less emotional, less herself. She doesn't realize that every time she shrinks, his control grows stronger. You're lucky I put up with you. Those words don't sound like love. They sound like ownership. They're not affection. They're manipulation, wrapped in fake humility. It's the message. No one else would tolerate you, so you'd better hold on to me. It's a subtle threat, one that keeps her afraid of being alone, even when loneliness is all she feels beside him. "I didn't mean it that way. You're too dramatic." That's how reality gets rewritten. He says something cruel, then blames her for reacting. Now the pain isn't his fault. It's her overreaction. That's the trick of emotional gaslighting. It convinces her to distrust her own perception. It teaches her that her memories are unreliable, that her hurt is exaggerated, that her instincts are wrong. Over time, she stops fighting back, not because she's weak, but because she's lost the map between truth and manipulation. He's drawn a new one for her, one where his love is the compass, and her emotions are always the mistake. This is the psychological trap that keeps so many women stuck. They're not staying because they like the pain. They're staying because the pain has been labeled as love. Because the man who hurts them also says, "I love you," right after. And the brain, desperate for connection, starts associating affection with harm. She tells herself, "He doesn't mean it." She explains to her friends, "He's just under stress." She defends him, even to herself. Because if she admits it's manipulation, she has to admit she's been living inside it. And that realization is almost unbearable. So she adapts. She laughs at his sarcasm to avoid another argument. She pretends his words don't sting. She walks on emotional eggshells, memorizing his moods, learning which version of herself is safest today. This is the slowest kind of breaking, the one that happens behind closed doors, with smiles in public and silent tears at night. He doesn't have to hit her to make her flinch. His tone does it for him. The tightening of his jaw, the heavy sigh, the words that start with, "I love you," but end with a punishment, they're enough to make her brace herself. And every time he says, "You're too dramatic," he erases another layer of her truth. He teaches her that expressing pain is manipulation, that needing reassurance is weakness, that love means enduring more than anyone should. Until one day, she believes it. She believes that being loved means being tolerated, that being chosen means being quiet, that being safe means not speaking at all. But here's the cruel irony. The more she silences her truth to keep his love, the less of her there is left to love. And one day, she'll wake up next to him, feeling nothing, no anger, no joy, no hope, just emptiness. Because emotional manipulation doesn't just kill relationships, it kills the self inside the relationship. That's the tragedy no one sees. The woman who's so lucky to be loved by someone who's quietly dismantling her confidence. The woman who's told she's dramatic for feeling human. The woman who still says, "I love you," not because she feels it, but because she's afraid of what happens if she doesn't. And when she finally walks away, people will ask, "Why now? He never yelled. He never hit you." And she'll simply answer, "No. But every time he said he loved me, it felt like another piece of me disappeared." There's a kind of silence that hurts more than shouting ever could. It's the silence that comes after love has frozen over, when passion turns to politeness, when care turns to cold indifference. That's when she starts hearing the 3 sentences that end more relationships than betrayal ever will. "Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore. Nothing you do is enough." These words sound calm, controlled, almost harmless. But make no mistake, they are the sound of emotional abandonment. They mark the moment when the man who once fought for her stops fighting at all, when he no longer sees her as someone to love, but as someone to endure. Do whatever you want. That's not freedom. That's resignation. It's the verbal equivalent of walking out while staying in the room. It says, I've stopped caring about what you choose because I've already chosen to detach from you. It tells her she can scream, cry, or try. It won't matter. The wall is up. I don't care anymore. Those 4 words kill something inside her every time they are said. They strip away the illusion of partnership, the comfort of being emotionally seen. And because women are natural nurturers, her instinct isn't to walk away, it's to fix it. She'll try to be kinder, softer, quieter. She'll tell herself, maybe if I love him better, he'll come back to me. And when he says, nothing you do is enough, it completes the cycle. Because now she's exhausted, but also guilty. No matter what she does, the gestures, the care, the effort, it's met with emptiness. It's like trying to light a candle in a room where there's no oxygen left. This is what emotional neglect feels like. Not being screamed at, but being unseen. Not being insulted, but being invisible. It's a slow erosion, a quiet death of connection that no one else notices. Because on the outside, everything looks fine. He doesn't yell anymore. He doesn't criticize. He just doesn't care. And that indifference, that hollow, heavy stillness, is what truly breaks her. Because indifference tells her that her presence no longer matters, that her absence wouldn't make a difference, and that realization that she could disappear emotionally and he wouldn't even blink is what finally makes her collapse inside. She'll start trying harder, cooking his favorite meals again, wearing the perfume he once said he liked, smiling more often, even when her heart feels like stone. She'll do everything she can to wake him up, to pull him back, to reignite something, anything. But nothing works. Because once a person has emotionally checked out, love becomes a one-sided effort. And no matter how much she gives, it just drains into a void. At first, she'll think he's tired. Then she'll think it's her fault. Then finally, she'll realize he's not tired. He's gone. Still there physically, but emotionally long departed. This kind of abandonment is cruel because it gives no closure. It doesn't end with a fight or a goodbye. It ends with silence, with distance disguised as calm, with detachment masquerading as peace. She's left living beside a ghost who still wears his body, a stranger who used to look at her like she was the only person in the room. And when that gaze disappears, so does her sense of being alive. The saddest part? No one notices. Friends see their photos and say, "You two look great." Family calls it a phase. But inside, she knows, love didn't end in flames. It ended in frost, because indifference is the coldest form of cruelty. It doesn't burn. It freezes. It turns warmth into numbness, conversation into silence, and affection into routine. And by the time she stops trying, it's not because she stopped loving. It's because she ran out of life to give. The moment she stops trying isn't when she stops loving. It's when she starts dying inside. That's how love dies in real life, not with betrayal or drama, but with disinterest. With a partner who looks at her like a chore instead of a choice. With a woman who still loves a man who's already emotionally gone. She doesn't need him to yell. She just needs him to care. But he doesn't. And that's the quietest heartbreak of all. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when something inside her finally clicks. After years of apologizing for feeling too much, after years of shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, she suddenly stops asking, "What's wrong with me?" and starts whispering, "What happened to me?" That's the moment of awakening, when she realizes those words that once defined her weren't the truth. They were weapons, carefully sharpened, disguised as honesty, wrapped in love, and aimed straight at her self-worth. It's not that she was too sensitive. It's that he was too careless with the power of his words. For the first time, she begins to see the pattern, the way every joke had an edge, every compliment carried a comparison. Every "I love you, but" came with a reminder of how small she was allowed to be. It's like she's been living under a spell, and suddenly the fog clears. She replays the moments in her mind, not to suffer them again, but to understand them. She remembers the tone that used to make her freeze, the sighs that made her rush to fix things she didn't break, the conversations that left her questioning her memory, her sanity, her worth. And this time, she doesn't feel shame. She feels clarity, because she finally sees what was really happening. It wasn't love. It was conditioning. Psychologists call it emotional invalidation. The slow erosion of your trust in your own feelings. The brain is wired to need validation, acknowledgement that what you feel is real, that your inner world makes sense. When that's missing, when every emotion is met with dismissal, mockery, or indifference, the nervous system panics. You go into survival mode, and that's exactly what she's been living in. Survival. That's why her body was always tense. That's why she flinched when voices got loud. That's why she could never relax, even in moments of peace. Because her brain learned that peace was temporary. That calm was just the silence before another storm. So no, she wasn't crazy. She was adapting. Her anxiety wasn't weakness. It was her body's alarm saying, "You're not safe here." Her tears weren't drama. They were data, emotional evidence that something was deeply wrong. But no one believed her, not even herself, until now. Now she sees that love isn't supposed to feel like walking on glass. It's not supposed to make you small. It's not supposed to cost you your voice. For the first time in years, she allows herself to feel angry, not at him, but at how much she gave up to keep him comfortable. Her silence, her softness, her peace, all traded for the hope that one day he'd notice. And that's when something beautiful happens. Not loud, not cinematic, just a quiet shift inside her. She realizes she doesn't need him to understand the damage he caused. She just needs to stop carrying it. That's the beginning of freedom. When she stops translating cruelty into care, when she stops mistaking control for concern, when she stops calling survival love. She sits there, maybe in the same room where so many arguments happened, and finally breathes differently. The same words that once made her crumble now sound empty. The spell is broken. She understands now. She was never too emotional. She was never too needy. She was just starving for emotional safety, something her nervous system begged for but never received. And when the body doesn't get safety, it doesn't rest. It endures. That's why she's tired, not crazy. And from that fatigue, something new begins. Strength. Because clarity gives birth to power. The moment she stops blaming herself, she starts healing herself. And when a woman begins to heal, every word that once broke her starts to lose its weight. That's the turning point. When she realizes she doesn't need an apology to move on. She just needs permission to stop believing his version of her. And she's finally ready to give herself that permission. If words can break her, words can also heal her. If a sentence can destroy her sense of worth, another can remind her she's still enough. Because what hurts women the most isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's the silence where kindness should have been, the absence of empathy, the moments where love could have spoken, but didn't. A woman doesn't need grand gestures. She doesn't need roses after the storm or apologies written in gold. What she needs is kindness spoken out loud, words that make her nervous system relax, that tell her she's safe, that remind her she's not asking for too much, only for the bare minimum of respect. Words like, "I hear you." Not "calm down," not "you're overreacting," just "I hear you." Because being heard is how a woman remembers she exists. Words like, "You don't have to apologize for feeling," because emotions aren't flaws. They're proof she's still alive after everything that tried to silence her. Words like, "You're allowed to take up space." Because love isn't supposed to shrink her. It's supposed to make her breathe easier, stand taller, and speak freely. You see, healing doesn't happen in one big moment of forgiveness. It happens in the small, quiet rewiring of her heart. The moment she replaces the lies she was told with truths she chooses to believe. That she is not too sensitive. She is deeply aware. That she is not too emotional. She is fully human. That her worth was never measured by how easy she was to handle, but by how honest she dared to be. Maybe one day she'll meet someone who speaks differently, someone whose words don't wound, but water. Who doesn't just say, "I love you," but also, "I'm listening." Who doesn't just compliment her beauty, but honors her softness, her strength, her story. But until then, she'll learn to be that voice for herself. Because the deepest wounds aren't in her body. They're in the places she stopped believing she mattered. And healing begins the moment she starts believing again. If you've ever been broken by words, know this. You're not weak for feeling it. You're human for surviving it. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of healing. Not that she forgets what was said. But those words no longer define her. She may still carry the scars, but this time, they're not proof of what broke her. They're proof of what she survived.